Making Change Studios. We're joined today by some illustrious guests who basically are overseeing policy, helping to change policy for the better, and overseeing prison reform, is what we'd like to say. I want to first of all introduce you to Samir Iqbal.
So I'm Samir Iqbal, I'm the National Health and Justice Lead for Career Matters.
And then we've got Paul Newton.
So I'm Paul Newton and I'm currently the governing governor at HMP Birmingham. I've been there for the last 6 years.
Trevorr Rawlins.
Hi, I'm Trevorr Rawlins, lived experience.
And then finally, obviously we saved the best till last, Claud.
Yeah, Claud Lofters. I'm currently a board of trustee for a charity, but previously I was a prison governor and part of Paul Newton's leadership team.
So just briefly on that, just so we can get a bit more context on what each of you do. First of all, I just want to start with you, Trevorr. When we're talking about prison reform or we're talking about the systems in place, why is rehabilitation such an important aspect of that? Why isn't it just, punishment, which I think a lot of people see what prison is. It's meant to be a punishment, not rehabilitation.
Yeah, if you don't have rehabilitation and you just punish, then you would have individuals that would come out and be in the same position and they'd have no rehabilitation, and the key word would no hope.
How important is that hope for individuals that are incarcerated?
I think while they're incarcerated, if they don't have hope, then how do they then get to be rehabilitated? How do they then get to move forward?
And Paul, so when we're talking about rehabilitation inside the system, what are we trying to do within the prisons, especially in where you're situated?
Yeah, I think Trev's he's encapsulated it really. I think I've been in the prison service now for about 37 years. So I started as a prison officer, and I think one of those most important things one of the reasons why I joined the job, and it's a bit of a cliche, but it is about how do you help people. And what I picked up from a very early age in the service is that most prisoners in our system are coming out to live in our society. So it seems more than sensible that what you do is you do everything that is within your gift to understand why folk come into prison and to try to, develop your regimes around that need. And I think Trevorr uses a word which I think is so important that is lost so much, is a hope. And because as a governor, if I can't create hope with my teams and translate that onto prisoners, why do we survive? And hope is really important, and I think not just for long-term prisoners, but for short-term prisoners, including those on remand who we know are not going to be. They're incarcerated for far too long, and they're in prison for a long time. So that's a long-winded response, but hope and trying to enable the likes of Trevorr. I can't do it, but enable people to turn their lives around intrinsically is what we're all about.
And don't worry, we're on a podcast, so long-winded's good. What about you, Samir, just to bring you in?
I think kind of like from my own personal perspective, I think the hope is the key, isn't it? Part of that rehabilitation and having that personal experience of being in the system, incarcerated in and out, and there's no trust in the system because of childhood experiences or through trauma that's suffered through while she's been in custody and so on and so on. It's hard to really see that rehabilitation, if that makes sense, because you're going back to the areas that you've come from and the people that you associate with. But I think if there's, through my own personal experience, there's somebody to nurture you through that process whilst in custody, I think there's a better chance of hope, if that makes sense, because they're able to show you potential that change is possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And to support the individual to think a bit more out of the box, that I don't have to live the way I have been living for many years. And I think that's really key, isn't it? That identification, hope, and having trust in the rehabilitation process.
Yeah, I agree. I think just on that, with the work that we do, especially with young people coming into the criminal justice system, the one thing I always try and gauge is that it's all right telling someone not to do something, but without giving them an alternative. Because what we have to think is we're telling people don't do something without looking at the mitigating circumstances, why they do what they do. And then turning around to them and just saying, well, now I'm going to send you back to the same environment from which you came. So when you wake up the next day, your intentions may be 100%, but when you wake up the next day and you open them blinds and you see the same thing that you've seen the day before, you've got the same people walking down the road, the same friends calling you to do what you're going to do, it's very easy for them sentiments to get lost within that framework. So yeah, I 100% agree with what you were saying now. Now, when we're talking about employment, and I think that's a big part, giving people hope into not just while they're inside. Is there enough things being placed on the outside for the transition? Because we can, be detained, then it's kind of you're outside, then you're on your own. I mean, you have to go and see probation or certain people, but they're mandatory. So even that is something that's being forced upon you to do, rather than you actually saying, do you know what, I need to go and do this. So how are we dealing with the transition for people coming out, and how is that?
So I think Trevor's probably best placed to be able to talk about some of those challenges, but I'll come in after Trevor.
Yeah. I think that's a good question and interesting. On once you are released, then you have your mandatory areas that you've got to cover. And that's where you would hopefully expect to get some support. But they seem to stick to their process and policies, which is ticking the boxes, making sure that you've understood what you've got to do when you get released. And then when you ask for the support, they give you a phone number or an address. When you get to the address, they give you a cup of tea and something to eat. And then the main thing that you may be asking for may be somewhere to live, yes, or you're looking for the job. They give you another phone number and another address, and that just continues throughout that process for several months. Mm-hmm. And if you're in the position of no abode, then it becomes quite serious, because it's not a case of that they will just find you somewhere. Okay. They'll give you a number and an address again, and then hopefully you may get a bed for the night if you're lucky. If you don't, then obviously you will be homeless. You'll then contact your council, and the council will then give you a caseworker who will give you a call and tell you whether you are up the priority list or not. And then after that, they may phone you again in 2 or 3 months, and all that time you may have been homeless, always looking for somewhere to live. Yes. So you're starting to go in reverse. And then the secondary thing that adds to that is you get your universal credit. So you'll get that within 48 hours of being released. But on the moment they give you your universal credit, you're in debt. Okay. So it kind of puts you in a position where you start questioning what you're doing, and how do you keep on that rehabilitation path? How do you drive forward? And that is strength of commitment of yourself. And if you're not strong or you're vulnerable, the challenges become more than a reality.
I think that over the last, I would say the last 3 or 4 years, I have to give credit to the government for putting money into resettlement services in the prison. I'll come out into the community in a minute, depending on your status. So the money that we put into, so for example, the employment advisory boards set up by an independent chair from business, that's really positive, and there's some real positive examples of folk getting into, getting into employment. Trevorr was part of this. We set up an employment an employment agency in Birmingham. So there was a couple of pronged attack around trying to understand what the skill set was around enabling folk when they got released. So helping with CVs, employment fairs, attached to real jobs actually.
Yes.
So I think, and we have got people working in the prison that are hand-holding people through the sentence, but increasingly it is still, you're in the lap of the gods.
Yeah.
So I'll speak on, Trevor and I have spoken a few times since his release. Now he knows how to use his phone. But what stuck with me with Trevor was, he's a very intelligent, capable person, and he won't mind me saying this, but of an age. So Trevor's probably not going to be one of these guys that's going to go and work on a building site where we had a lot of our employment opportunities for the younger prisoner that's been released that work really, really well for me. And that's not just labouring, that's management as well. And I guess what really stood out to me with Trevor, who has put so much into those services that I've described in the prison to improve it for others. Just before Christmas when I spoke to Trevor, it was almost like they've got nothing for me. They've talked to me about my skill set and my skill set doesn't fit. So Trevor's very lucky that, he's got other interests that can help and support Trevor being out in the community, but others don't have that.
Yes.
And that can become really, really difficult. So in summary, 5 years, over a 5-year period, actually there's a lot of money being put into the prison service to help and support people to get into employment, to get into accommodation, if you come under probation. But if you fall off so for example, you're remanded, you're released at court, you don't come under probation, the lack of money in the community, and that's what it's about, and the lack of commissioned services is probably, linked to the amount of recalls that I've got coming back into my prison. So this morning, I had 152 recalls in Birmingham prison. 152. Now, that's regrettable, that's difficult, but some of that will be linked into where we just haven't been able to join up the dots, as Trevor's described, and unfortunately some folk have just fallen back, they've fallen back into, as you've described, some of the older ways, if you like.
I'd like to give a different perspective, because I've worked, I'm with a charity now working with ex-offenders, both in custody and in the community. And I think the key thing is about trust. And a lot of offenders' experience with the criminal justice system, it hasn't been good. And building that trust at the back end in prison is after going through the various court system, probation, police, and then the prison. There's a lot of work to done to recapture that trust. And even post-release, speaking to the men that we work with, they talk about the post-release isn't necessarily support, it's more about control and supervision. And as Paul's mentioned earlier, there has been a lot of recalls for what I would see really minor issues. So there's a lack of trust going into the probation service. The offenders working with the offender, so they don't engage necessarily with all the processes and potentially accessing some of the support that is available. And again, what we've also found as a charity working with the probation service is that we don't necessarily work together, we work in isolation. So some of the advice and support that we offer our men isn't taken on board by the probation, and we see ourselves as more as an advocate sometimes for the offenders, but we're not allowed to be in that role. So there's a bit of a conflict between some of the support agencies, charities in the community that want to work with offenders, and what they're allowed to do under their supervision. And it's just that sort of push and pull occasionally does make it very difficult for the offenders in terms of accessing support and moving on, because sometimes they feel they can't move on and they're just going through the motions until either at the end of the licence or something drastic has happened.
Yeah.
So can I just follow up a question
course.
to Claude? So obviously, Claude, your previous experiences, you've been a governor, you worked nationally for the HMPPS, and now you work for a trustee board that works from an advocate perspective and supporting this area. So what's that transition been like for you from previously having all of that experience and now working in the role that you're doing now?
I found working with the charity quite liberating because I'm not constrained by some of the problems that Paul will come across. And the politics is something we don't get involved with. I know Paul, again, we talked about, why is prison seen as punitive rather than rehabilitation. There's a lot of politics around that, and vote, what you can get in an election. It's always been in the prison service mission statement about rehabilitation. It's always been in there for a long time. It's part of our training, so it's not new. It's been part of our DNA for quite some time. But sometimes the politics does get in the way of doing that.
I think what I would say about though, it's not in the DNA of society though, is it? And that's something that I think. So as a governor, and these guys will know, is that I get on my high horse because I've got to solve the ills of society. Mm-hmm. So this is a different conversation, but it's really important that every opportunity we get, we need to have a conversation with the public about what we want from our prison population, including remands.
Absolutely.
Because society's got to own that prison population. And until we get that, we will always be talking about some of these, these matters that we're raising now. But I do firmly believe some countries have got it absolutely spot on in that the local area and the community in the country owns the prison population and that rehabilitation. And that until we get into that sphere and talking to the country about that, I think we'll always have this conversation.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I was literally just about to say the same point. I think there's a disconnect between society and people in population, because there's a lot of things going on with people to say, like you said, you can handhold people to take them to a point, but if we don't live in a redemptive society, then you are always going to carry those labels. Like, it's a point where you're meant to have served your time, done, and that's it. You're meant to have a clean, fresh start to start your life again. However, when we're talking about employment and things, it's all well and good having the schemes get set up, but how really in tune is society with allowing those opportunities to happen?
So from my perspective, you got that community of practice here. So you got within the integrated all the services, you have that community of practice that we need to learn off each other, how to get better outcomes and X, Y, Z. But there's no community of practices when individuals are leaving the secure and detained state because of the complexities that come with individual. And I think there's that stigma, isn't there? Yeah. That people that are ex-offenders or people that have been through the criminal justice can never reform or can never obtain a role or a job, and there's that discrimination piece as well, isn't it? We want to care for you, but we don't want to employ you.
Yeah, but I also think that's a case of, again, people not understanding people's stories. Like, you could have people who have been incarcerated or in prison for the same crime, but there could be 100 different reasons why that crime was committed, and I think that's always important to take into account. Now, just on what you were saying, what are the requirements? So when you are leaving, if you need to get employment, are there any specific requirements for people on licence, or is that just dependent on crimes?
What, in terms of employment?
Yeah, in terms of employment. So when you're leaving HMPPS, how easy is it for people to find and get employed? Is that like...
As HMPPS, we've done a lot of work with employers and engagement to actually break down some of the preconceived ideas and biases they may have around their perception of prisoners, and we've invited employers into the prison so that they can meet and talk to individuals and hear their stories, and actually they're not as demonised as potentially they'd previously thought. But you know, just thinking about the amount of people that we are locking up, you know, I'll be surprised if there is nobody that doesn't know somebody that's been in custody.
Yes.
And if they do know somebody that's been in custody, actually, I mean, I've got relatives that have had experience of the criminal justice system, and they're not bad people. You know, they've made mistakes, and I think that's the story that we're not actually getting out there, because, you know, the press and the people that control the press are people that are disconnected from everyday life that we experience.
I think, you know, from my perspective of being a serving prisoner once upon a time, and then coming and working within a secure and detained state, because like the way I view the world is different to how I viewed the world many years ago.
Of course.
And what I mean by that is because we're in this system where we've got no trust, because we with the uniform, because that's what the barrier is. The uniform can be often one of the biggest barriers. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, you know, like kind of working in the system now, I can see what work actually goes on for this stuff to happen into the community. Mm-hmm. But then there's that personal responsibility as an individual as well.
100%.
We can say the system's X, Y, and Z, but is the people taking personal responsibility for their rehabilitation as well? So we can't just shift the blame on the criminal justice system. Previously I did.
Yes.
But through experience of working in the system and working within HMP Birmingham and stuff, I've seen the work that's getting done to support with that rehabilitation. And I think it's an important factor that people that are leading it, the people that are on the ground, that true representation, that change is possible.
I think the one thing that I would say to that is that as a governor, and quite rightly, I've got some targets around employment. Never used to have those. So I've got targets for employment at 6 weeks on release, but obviously that doesn't cover everybody. But probably more importantly, and now a target at 6 months, okay, which is really interesting that the 6 month numbers are quite high. I'd say quite high. You know, it's not every prisoner that gets out, but proportionally the percentage is quadruple the number it is at 6 weeks. And that makes sense because some guys are just not ready for employment at 6 weeks.
Yeah, of course.
Let's be fair about it. But what I would say to that is that so when you talk about requirements, we would want to try and get everybody that's ready, whether it's into employment or whether it's in further education or into something, which can be voluntary work as well. We've got better at it. My point with that is, so the employment advisory boards, so Harry, who's my chair, I've got it on Friday, he brings a completely different perspective to my thought process because he's an expert. You know, he's in charge of a big company that produces CVs and they're an employment agency. They know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And what we've got from that is that over the last 12 months, they've introduced us to different companies, and we've got, you know, a range of guys that have got themselves into employment. Coming back to, you know, internally with one of, you know, who we all know really, really well, Jonathan Floyd. You know, his initiative, the Inside Job Employment Hub, that's come from a guy who thought, look, this is my idea, we can do better. And actually, us listening to Floydie and just with that, this is my idea, it's been turned into it's 4 years old now. And the amount, we're talking I think in 4 or 5 prisons, we're talking hundreds of prisoners who've got into employment or who have had the opportunity to go into employment, because it comes back to your point, not everybody's ready and they're going to have to want to do it. You know, sometimes that's some tough messages or some tough calls that people need to make. So I think it's still baby steps. It's still not owned locally by the community, but it is getting better. And just my last point on this, there is something about, so Trevorr and I have worked together for 10 years. You know, a big prison in Kent, up in Birmingham, and then there's been another 4 or 5 guys that have been absolutely wedded to the journey of trying to improve Birmingham. And interestingly, all these guys and now out in the community, they're doing really well in the community, and they're achieving. And there's something in that when you engage people properly that, you know, that for example with Trevor, you know, Trevor, I always say with Trevor was my barometer in both prisons. This is working really, really well. You might want to have a look at that because actually it's not working as well as it should do, but this is an idea of how I think it could work. So I think my point with that one is that quite often what prisons try to do is do it themselves, but don't listen to those folk that actually know what works.
The experience. Yeah.
I think just picking on Paul's point, and probably Paul is probably the odd one out in terms of, you know, governors, in that Paul does take risks. You know, he'll make a decision.
Edit that out.
Calculated risk, that's it.
And it's about doing the right thing sometimes, and not really necessarily asking permission. But it's you know, with use of technology in prisons. You know, unfortunately, we couldn't teach Trevor how to use his phone before he left. But you know, having access to IT equipment,
yes,
because actually that's how lads now are going to have to apply for jobs, fill in. We've been able to sort of have that introduced. I remember Paul giving permission for somebody to use my laptop to get an interview whilst they're in prison, still serving a sentence, and they got a job, so they knew on their release they were going out with a job, right? That you know, I'm talking a few years ago, but that didn't happen in prison. That didn't really happen in prisons, and it's the first step. And then once, you know, a governor's been brave enough to do that, it then does filter down and allow people the permission to actually do something.
With that, you know, because it's an important point, and this is for every governor that would listen to this, is manage the risk, because that's what we do every day of our lives. But sometimes what you have to do is properly, first of all, you've got to understand what that risk may be, because quite often it's negligible and it's always manageable. And sometimes what you have to say is, I'm really sorry, I've considered everything, but the answer is not yet. But quite often, and like we say, I've got probably about a dozen ex-prisoners that are coming back into my prison. You know, some have got keys, some have got access to, but it allows people to do their job. But I would say with that, sometimes still the wheels are very, very slow to turn, even when the governor says, actually, thumbs up, I'm okay with that. But I would say to, like I say, governors listening, to really get traction in these areas and to listen to the folk that know what works, manage the risk. Don't take the risk, manage the risk. It's, you know, because that's intrinsically, that's what that's about.
But I think there's an important factor in a couple of points that kind of Claud have kind of mentioned and stuff, like kind of like I'm clear in HMP Birmingham and Paul managed the risk. I know Claud Lofters supported with some of that stuff. I think it's an important factor, isn't it? Because we're promoting rehabilitation. We're asking individuals to rehabilitate, but then we're not allowing them access to the establishment to support with engagement. But Birmingham has overcome that due to kind of senior leadership and managing that risk. But I think there's an important factor here, so like kind of what Paul was touching on and Claud, like kind of like where Trevor is at the moment. Trevor's just finished a sentence in October, the multiple years behind the door and stuff. And now he's coming and working with us and looking to work with us in the near future. But that started off in HMP Birmingham. So kind of like with the tech enablement, what we was talking about, having digital access, where individuals were able to participate in the lived experience charter as assessment panel members. And that was never done in a secure and detained estate where they come in on Microsoft Teams and they're assessing the sites with another peer from outside of the establishment. The risk getting managed accordingly, and then coming to an awards and presenting the awards to the services that they've assessed, and then following them through into other establishments. And if HMP Birmingham didn't pave the way for that, then other establishment wouldn't be able to manage that risk accordingly because they've learned from the process.
Yes, the blueprint.
Yeah, so and since then, so kind of like what kind of Paul was touching on, and it's thanks to Claud as well, because Claud was an integral part in this, and I want to mention Laura Lowe as well, because these were integral people that supported with this initiative to come into custody. Since then, all 4 of them guys that have been a part of the Lived Experience Charter have been released since. 2 of them are currently on our team, so they're doing kind of as associate contracts, working with us, and doing some of the work. Trevor's been released. We've had another guy that's been released. So we're kind of following that path because the work that's been done with the individuals while still in custody.
Yeah.
And I think furthermore to that, they were willing to and wanted to change and stay out of that criminal justice system, if that makes all too better reform.
That goes back to Paul's point, doesn't it, about you have to be ready to take them steps.
Sure.
You know, it's one thing, someone giving you everything, but if someone gives you an opportunity, who can step forward and manage that?
Sorry, I was going to say, I think it's also important to say, we talk about managing the risks. So when we've been given that opportunity within, let's talk about Birmingham, because I've been given that opportunity, I also manage the risk. So when we brought people into the team, it was really important for me to tell them, these are the risk factors, these have to be managed, because as far as I was concerned, if they spoiled that situation, that impacted upon me.
Yeah.
So we always made sure that we tried to pick the right guys. We didn't always pick the right ones, so we moved on and got another individual. But there was a lot of things that happened at Birmingham, such as we put together the project for the Inside Out, which was managed from the MOJ, and we were part of that project into dealing with guys to get them into the employment. So what we would do is see them 3 months before and go through what personal risk factors have they got, what are their concerns, what do they need for when they're released, even to the point of that we had DWP in the prison. So everything was done for them instead of them having to go outside and think, how do I deal with DWP now?
Yeah.
So there's some really forward thinking there. We did a lot of work with Claud as well on things that we needed to do. We did a lot around BME and things like that. We did enormous work on equality and diversity, and looking at it from everybody's perspective.
Like cultural competence.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, when I first went to Birmingham, Paul, I called it a secondment from Swale side. So I was seconded to Birmingham. But you know, I went because I enjoyed what I was doing. It gave me focus.
Yeah.
But when I got to Birmingham, we had a different culture of officers who were like shell shocked to see a prisoner with his own office, his own computers, his own printers, and directing.
It's an interesting point that Trevor raises there, you know, because the culture of Birmingham pre-2018, Trevor's office, or the expectations, as we called it, hub, it was linked to the HMP, their expectations. They had an office, so it was on the centre. It had a computer that worked, with a printer that worked. But what you found is that slowly but surely, that culture absolutely turned. It didn't take long because of what Trevor described. It was how the guys conducted themselves. And initially it was kind of like, I mean, this is the centre of Birmingham Prison, where a number of years ago, if
you couldn't cross it.
Well, yeah, let alone a prisoner, but if an officer had walked on the centre for more than a minute, there was it was frowned upon, shall we say. But
Use the spiral stairs.
But what happened was, it became accepted, and Trevor and others used to take notes. What you found is that there was more prison officers going into the expectations office to ask for advice. Or what do you think about this? What about this? And what about that? And it was, I remember sitting, I used to go and sit and have a cup of coffee usually when I was fed up with the world. And I'd go in there and just say, right, what's going on? How's your week been? Da-di-da-di-da. But then they'd tell me about the flow. In fact, I'd sit round the corner and staff used to come through. Trev, what about this? George, what about this? Floydie, what about this? And it was interesting about culture change in that Saturdays and Sundays, 7 days a week, there wasn't a blink of an eyelid. The orderly officer was there, expectations was here, and it worked. And if you can work in Birmingham, you can work in any prison. And similarly, it worked very well at Swellside.
Yeah.
So, but it is about, I guess it's about, as a governor, why do these people exist? And they're here to help you as prison officers. And all of a sudden, bang. And I remember we used to do a briefing on the centre. And I remember asking Trevor and the team to come down and to talk about the importance of prison officers enabling. So we set up a mental health, what do we call them?
Navigators.
Yeah, the navigators, that was it.
Yeah.
And, but what was happening is we were training these guys through health and justice, but what we weren't doing was properly enabling folk to, when a guy was in crisis, to get from G-Wing to K-Wing. So these guys came and did a pitch in front of a big chunk of prison officers, but actually the message got across. And it was literally, oh my life, listen to that. And right from there, COVID didn't help, and we probably should have repeated that a little bit more, but it was a really powerful message that in a morning briefing at 7:15, along came 4 prisoners to give a State of the Nation talk. And what they said, look, this is really important to us. You've trained us, but enable us, we can help you. So I know that's a bit of a long-winded thing. Really,
It helps me pose another question, to be honest, because from an empowering perspective,
Yeah.
so you've got Claud, you've got kind of Trevor, you've got yourself that kind of worked within HMP Birmingham.
Yeah.
But how does it empower you as individuals, seeing them individuals that have been a part of your environment, that have come out since then because they've all completed some kind of form of long sentences? How does that make you feel as prison governors, yourself, Trevor, coming out into the community?
I'll come in first then, Claude. I know it's a cliche, but it's why I exist. Not just as a governor, but as a person. Because as a member of society, I want Trevor and others to come back out in society and contribute to society. I don't want them to be in a prison and be that burden on the taxpayer. And I think, so what I have is a great big smile on my face. And I had to say to my boss the other day, I think I might have to put in a security report, because I've got more contact with ex-prisoners than I do my staff on my phone. But you know what? That's the bit. I'm cool with that, because ultimately, in terms of being a mentor, if you like, at any given point, when I say to the likes of Trevor or George or others, if you want me, I'm here.
Yeah.
And just for those words of advice, I'm there. So. And I'll go back to, like I say, I was a PE officer at Felton back in the day, and just trying to enable and being part of that process. And I will say this: it is about Trevor. It's not about me. It is, and it's never about the prison officer or the governor. It's about actually what do we present, what do we enable, and how do we allow that person to think, actually, I don't want to do that. I've made a mistake. And I've got an opportunity now. So I guess in summary, I have a big smile on my face when people, and also, I should say this, people make mistakes. So despite all of that, and I'll give you one example, we've got a big refurb program going on some of our wings, and we've had guys that have been rottled, that have been released, and they've gone even on tag, gone to work on that site because we've enabled it. And one of the guys made a mistake. He made a mistake that the construction industry is very good in 2 ways. They do a lot of testing, of drug testing. This guy failed. But what they are very good at is actually not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They realise that people make mistakes and they give that guy a chance, and he's doing okay. So it wasn't just that, no, you've made a mistake. We've got to recognise that actually people do make mistakes.
We all make mistakes.
Of course we do.
We all make mistakes.
Claude, sorry.
Pretty similar experiences. I think I can remember, just down at a train station, somebody tapped me on the shoulder and says, "You remember me," sort of thing. Because we don't really hear the stories. We hear the failures because they come back, right? The successes we don't really get to hear. So I'll give you an example of somebody that actually lives near me, and I first met him in a juvenile. I worked in a juvenile, so he was under 16, Nathan, and he was released, And at the time I was deputy governor, I signed the licence, DTO order, so it released him. Anyway, I was taking my kids out for Christmas and was walking down, and the kid says, there's this guy's following us. and I looked back, and it was kind of, everybody's like hoods, it was raining, it was winter, and eventually the guy came up to me and sort of said, and Nathan, even though he was about in his teens, was massive, absolutely big unit, and he turned around and says, you don't remember me? And I can't remember faces. No, I didn't know. And he says, oh, you signed my DTO, you let me go. And we had a bit of a chat, and I got my kids with me at the time, and we had a really good chat. He settled, he started a college course. Anyway, a few years later, I was on detached duty at Broomfield Young Offenders, and I saw him, and I says, what's happened to you now? Oh, never his fault. Something happened. He got involved with his friend. And then he was released, saw him in the community, allegedly doing okay. And then I moved to an adult prison. He was there. So from juvenile right the way to the adult system, in and out of custody, Nathan. And he's kind of one of those lovable rogues, right? He gets involved in things that he shouldn't get involved, immaturity. Anyway, about 2 years ago, during lockdown, just after lockdown came out, I was walking past and he came out of the barbers, and he was telling about his story. He's got a job, he's got a house, he's got kids, got a car, doing really, really well, and he's starting to decorate his house, and he berated me because I didn't get him on a plumbing course so he could do the plumbing in his house, but all the other skills that we taught him in terms of bricklaying and all that, he's got all those skills. So for me, he wasn't quite ready during those periods, but we gave him all the skills that at the point that it was right for him and he wanted to make those changes, he could make those changes. And as Paul said earlier, people sometimes aren't right the first time, maybe the second time, but if we keep trying and give them the skills, eventually they'll make that change, and they have the confidence because they've got the skills and the experience, and they can actually make that change. And one thing that Nathan said was that, can I go back to the prison that I'd already left, to tell the staff that he had a house, wife, kids, car, because for that it meant that he's not an offender, because he's got everything that we've got. And it was an important message that he wanted me to actually go back and tell the staff. So I did email them.
Hopefully when they listen to this as well, they get the message as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, the staff do like to hear those stories. We just don't hear it that often. Yeah. So it was, for me, I thought it was important that I did pass that on to those members of staff, because they do remember it, because he was, people think that everybody that we lock up are dangerous, and but some are very ordinary people that have made wrong choices. And we used to have loads of laughs in the office with some of the guys and that, and it was, because they were normal people.
Yes, it was like a normal day.
Yeah.
I could probably add to that and keep mine short and say, being empowered in prison gave me purpose. Getting up every day. For me, I went to work 7 days a week. I was getting up to go to work, and I always knew that we would achieve something out of it. It might have took several days or whatever. I always knew that the governors that we worked with, or the staff or senior staff, they didn't hear what I said. They listened to what we had to say. That was so important in making those changes and being forward thinking. If we could take a lot of the projects that we did in Birmingham and supporting some of the probation and things that they do outside, it would help make things so much easier for people out there.
I think you've just said two things that really hit home. One, you wasn't heard. They were listening to what you were saying. I think active listening is such an underrated skill just in everyday life. People are usually just waiting to respond rather than taking on what you're saying. So I can imagine that that's when you know that people are listening to you but hearing you at the same point. that's really empowering. And then we also have to remember that a lot of these young men that are going in, it's a lot about guidance. We're talking about mentors. Now, whether you want to call yourself a mentor, qualified, just having someone that you can talk to who will give you a bit of guidance goes so far. I think when you're open to that, it can really change your life.
Absolutely, yeah.
I say this to a lot of people. People say, about counselling, because a lot of the work we do is with people who have been through trauma, and they talk about like counselling. I say, I'm not a counsellor, I'm a mentor. So you can come and speak to me if everything's okay. If you just want to have a chat, that's not counselling. That's if you want just a piece of advice, a bit of guidance. That's the way I like to look at it. It doesn't always have to be a negative for you to come and speak. Just come and tell me how you're doing. It's so rewarding to hear people that you've worked with say, yeah, I'm doing well. Do you know what I mean? It's more, that's the most, when you get an email saying, I really took this from the sessions that you did.
I think that for me sometimes I often come away with the work that we do kind of nationally and locally and that. And I think if I kind of didn't have contact with the individuals within the secure and detained state and that, I don't know how long I would able to do the role that I'm doing. And the reason being, this is important to know what's happening on the ground.
Yes.
To able to identify with them individuals that are going through the process of that. Because it can be traumatic and I think it empowers me to see that when I see professionals or governors or the people that are in senior positions that are really have that same value-based approach, because I think that's an important factor as well, because you could talk about rehabilitation all day if your values are not intact.
Yeah.
Then it's pointless, if that makes sense, because you're just doing a tick box exercise. So
well, I was just about to say that sometimes you have to be like really strong-minded to keep that, because as we know, as your career develops or the work you do develops, sometimes you can't help but step back from the people. So the aspect of what you love doing, you kind of have to, when you're starting to employ people and run organisations. Before, when you said like when you was working in Falton, you're speaking to the people every day, but get over the years that's become less and less, and then you have to start to delegate things. So you have to be strong and you have to keep your values, not the systems, because sometimes that overrides it. The system's values replace yours, so you start thinking like that. So I think that's important to just keep in mind.
I think to add to that, I think there really is some positive things that happen in prisons that the government have put in place. Key workers, it's a really good scheme. Unfortunately, they don't have adequate staff to manage it to where they expect it to be. But that deals with that meeting with a prisoner and saying to them, how's your day? How's it going for you? And that key worker scheme, if they can get that right, that will benefit so much.
It's a really good point, that, because just on that, I mean, this will be an interest to both Trevorr and Claud. Currently, and I don't know how it's happened, but I'm 67 prison officers over my target staffing figure. That's over recruited, which is amazing. So yesterday, I know, is that 77 key work sessions were delivered yesterday in Birmingham prison. Now, the benefits, provided that you know a prison officer knows how to conduct the cells on a key work session, it's amazing what you get. Prisons are difficult at the moment with population, the churn. So if there's ever been a need to stand up and enable key work, it's now. Just one thing on that though, and I'll come back to your time in Birmingham. One of the most powerful things because we run some courses at Birmingham for prison officers. So the full course was done at Birmingham. Part of that process and the feedback that I used to get from the prison officers is that they really enjoyed the Trevorr session or the Expectations Hub session, because that was real.
Yes.
And moving forward with in the prison service, not just Birmingham but everywhere, we have got a lot of inexperienced, doesn't matter what age you are, but inexperienced prison officers. My focus and our focus must turn to how do we utilise those peer support workers that actually, so reverse it up. have a key work session with a prisoner to a member of staff. And that's where we start to need to be moving towards, because, you know, part of, I always used to say to the prisoner, so the prison council, we had a big prison council, and I always used to implore them to be part of that process of a prison officer, a new prison officer, starting their new career. Because I always say it's not just about us as staff. Prison officers will settle into their new role, but prisoners play a part in that as well. Good, bad and indifferent. But actually, we don't do enough of it. How do we utilise those guys that can, or women that can influence and support the development of prison officers? And we've got to go into that world, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And just on your innovation, I mean, 5 years ago, I think you took a risk on us and letting us develop, and we were probably one of the first people to podcast inside prison, inside Birmingham. So thank you for that. That was
I think what I would say to that one as well is that I am very, you mentioned that the prison officer day-to-day, prison governor, as you just by definition you step away, so you're reliant on good people.
team.
Good people around you. So there's a guy particularly in Birmingham you know about, a guy called Trevorr.
Amazing guy.
Amazing guy.
Trevor.
And he's one person that, wow, how that man has touched people's lives just by being himself, being like a dog with a bone and asking those questions. The guy's amazing.
Yes.
He really is, you know. And so I wanted to just put Trevor's name in.
Yeah, because you know, like Trevor, on his face is fake. You know,
Oh, it's so like, you don't know where to
you don't hardly get a smile out of him. But you know what? It's like I worked with Trevor for years and that. And like when I send him stuff over around the lived experience charter, he's on it straight away.
Yeah.
Dates change, you know, like we have to take the regime into consideration and stuff. 9 to 11, he's logged on 10 minutes before. You know what I mean? And getting the lads there and accommodating and bringing us all. It's definitely a massive shout out, man.
It reminds me of John Malkovich. So I know there's been a lot of great work going on over the years, like you say, within Birmingham HMP. How has it been working with Career Matters in specifics and the initiatives that they're running at the moment? I'll throw that to you. Claud.
I have very little to do with Career Matters, I'm afraid. So I'm probably not the best one to really start.
That's going to change.
Yeah, okay.
No, because I want to bring some context to it. So obviously with the lived experience charter and stuff, and stuff like that, the initial conversation with yourself and then Paul and stuff like that. So us getting into the establishment was from the support of yourself as well, Claud. And then obviously you retired, and obviously a lot's gone on since then. Do you know what I mean?
So you was there at the start. You was there at the key points.
I mean, like everything, we're there to enable, really positive, good things that make a difference.
Yes.
And like Paul says, as long as we manage the risk, we just need to make it happen. And that was my role, was really just trying to facilitate some of that on Paul's behalf. And I had to go back to speak to Paul and say, I think I've got it covered.
I think increasingly what we have got a little bit better at, we still need to minimise duplication, because you have a whole range of bodies that should be doing work that increasingly have to hold nail their feet to the floor to make sure that they do that. But for example, we've commissioned we've filled the void. Career Matters, Inside Job, what Trevor was describing there about an MOJ initiative which came from the guys, lived experience charter. We commissioned a departure lounge. With a third party company. So we've filled an awful lot of voids that actually has come full circle, and the prison service is now starting to commission them, which is brilliant. It really is good. But I think what we just need to do is just join it all up better. And the opportunity to do that is through that, whether it depends on where it's running a prison, but that reducing reoffending strategy board, where I've got a very good lead in Birmingham at the moment in Jackie Quirk, but she just pulls it all together and just avoid duplication. But I think centric to all of that is the guy in Birmingham, of course. You know, it's just really focusing on what makes a difference and whether that service makes any difference. Does it add value? And I guess the final matter on that is that, you know, there's never enough money, and that's always the problem. You know, I'd dearly love to be able to be given a pot of money, you know, every year to be able to say, look, I want this, I want this, and I want that. I think what we have to make choices, and sometimes, you know, that is very, very difficult. But I think we're getting better at it, is probably what I'm trying to say.
So from just to kind of like give you a bit of context in that, from a career matters perspective, obviously we've got tech enablement on the drug recovery wing, and that don't happen if it wasn't support from the prison. We wasn't able to get individuals to access the Thrive program within the prison. We're currently running a program on the drug recovery wing, like a mentoring employment program. So that work that's been done, that collaboration piece with the drug strat leads, the custodian managers on the wings that are supporting it, advocating it to other prisons, that this should be embedded in some of your prisons and that stuff. But I think over the last few years, from a collaboration perspective, the prison hasn't held any bars, if that makes sense. I'm trying to allow us to come in.
Put restrictions.
There are no restrictions. Like even for an example, like my key clearance, I used to work for the NHS prior to working for Career Matters, and I was cleared in HMP Birmingham. Laura Lowen and the system just changed my employer. Instead of me going through all of the rigmarole, they was able to forward think and put mechanisms in place to able for us to kind of continue delivering the program. And we're running a couple of programs currently out of HMP. We've got a lived experience charter where the lads are involved. Trevorr can touch on that a little bit, and we've got the Thrive program that's running and that. And again, Claud and Laura was the ones that originally initiated that within the secure estate. And
Could you just give us context on the Thrive program?
So yeah, so the Thrive program is a kind of it's a digital platform. So basically, it's that digital divide between care leavers, criminal justice, to access into employment, education, and mentoring and stuff. And we was funded by UFI to kind of run some pilots across the country. One of them was HMP Birmingham, to get tech enablement for individuals to access learning materials, education materials through the platform. And what we decided at that time was, from a Thrive perspective, that we wanted to test how does it look like in a secure and detained estate. For example, so we're currently in HMP Birmingham, where we've got tech enablement. We're going to start in April in HMP ISIS, but that's going to be specifically working with care experienced and gang affiliated because of the gang population within the secure estate. And the way we've done it through that process is downloadable through the Coracle laptops. So we've got approval from Coracle to able to download the Thrive, so through the platform, some of the learning. So we've got the care certificate on the and the whole purpose of Thrive is to get people into health and social care jobs and health and justice jobs, and finding opportunities for people to access it. So we've got apprenticeship stuff on there. We've got ring-fenced lived experience job roles that are on there, open to free open university courses, modules, stuff around criminal justice reform, ambassadors boards. There's so many different factors within that support that.
So essentially, it's almost a wraparound service, but just brought into the new digital age.
Yeah, digital age, and furthermore, that is more around education and employment as well. Even though that the wider services, like kind of for an example in HMP Birmingham, we're doing a mentoring program around skills, motivation, building confidence, identifying what skill sets you got, understanding how you navigated streets, what are the skill sets that you used while you was on the streets, and how can you transfer that into a positive direction.
So it's kind of like pro-social identity, essentially.
And I think what through that process and that, the lot of individuals that have gone through the process has empowered them that. And I think what's important, I think because of the theme of today, the benefits of employing the people with lived experience and that, because it's lived experience led. There's more engagement. Do you know what I'm trying to get at? If the prison wasn't supportive of us coming into the establishment with criminal record backgrounds and stuff, we wouldn't have the opportunity to deliver the work and that. So we're doing some stuff with integrated care systems as well,
Okay.
integrated care boards. So that's separate part, and that's specifically focusing on the care experience community. So we've been commissioned by, I think it's Surrey and Heartlands ICS, and we've got people into jobs that have been through the care system. So education, employment is the forefront, but then there's the wraparound support for other services to support that individual through that journey as well.
That's right.
And Trevor, your experience like working with us?
I think, well, the experience has been interesting and exciting for me. So working with Career Matters has actually got me into the lived experience charter and the things that we do there, which has been excellent. As a prisoner, imagine a prisoner assessing an NHS trust. I'm assessing them to see whether they are in the right position to be part of this charter, and that was really important. And as we've grown and got bigger, and the more work that we're doing now, it's becoming more and more interesting. I think the important thing about the lived experience charter is when these trusts want to come on board, is when we're checking their information to see what they're going to do for an individual. Are they just going to employ them and they've got a job? Or is it a career path? And what is that path? And what is that progression? How do you evidence that? Where is your feedback? Where is your demonstration of how you're going to do that? Which is really, really interesting, being able to sit there and assess it and say, well, there's not enough evidence in this section, and they go away and they come back with even more. And then you've got those that are really, really good at it as well, and they've got everything in place, and they tell us the number of people they're going to take in as lived experience. And it's not just a case of giving them employment, it's about saying they have management positions. This is how they get to that position. And they all do the checks, they all do the DBS checks, but what I liked about the recent one that we just did was they didn't just do a DBS check, they said, this is how we manage that risk. So even though they had information, they says, that's not the end, this is where we now manage it. And that was put in place. I thought that was a fantastic thing. But all these things I've learned through Career Matters, through my colleague here, and it's getting better and better by the day.
There's one last point I wanted to make, just to kind of reinforce that if it wasn't for HMP Birmingham, for an example, and the support from Claud and Paul Newton and that other secure and detained estates wouldn't be interested, if that makes sense, because we have piloted it, we've demonstrated that this works in a secure and detained state, and other prisons are starting to jump on board to say, how can we implement this? So it started from HMP Birmingham, from a not just from the lived experience charter, from a Thrive perspective, because of and some prisons are not tech enabled, so we look at different ways of doing it, but it started off there and we're able to demonstrate that.
Why is the Thrive program made such a difference? Because essentially, like I said, from what I'm gathering, like I said, there are these things in place, maybe not on the digital platform, but why is that such an important thing? Why has that model worked so well?
I think for me the other day when we went, because basically another thing what the prisoners done is, and I think it's definitely important to highlight, because obviously security is an important factor within the secure and detained state, and we have to keep in with the guidelines and stuff. But the prisons have been forward thinking about it, so people are accessing the Thrive platform in the prison's office. That don't happen. I'm trying to get to do something, but the thing is, it's supported by a member of staff, so they're never left alone. So even though I'm with them, doing all of the stuff, the learning stuff, there's a prison officer on board, standing sitting there and supporting that application. So the next thing going forward, what we're doing is with HMP Birmingham, we're going to give access to the custodial manager a caseload. So when you're talking about key work sessions and stuff like that, and think about. So that could be a part of the learning, a part of the key work sessions.
But part of the answer to that is that when we enable through funding, we can deliver. So where you're delivering from predominantly is on D-Wing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's part of a government initiative. So in Birmingham, I've got and this is even in Claud and Trevorr didn't see this, but we've got a pathway for helping and supporting those that have got problems with substances. So I've got a treatment unit of guys coming in off the street, But what we have got now, like on D wing, on the 2s and the 3s and the 4s, is a recovery unit. And that recovery unit has got a dedicated custodial manager and 3 prison officers. So, and they sit above my normal numbers, and they are absolutely wedded to what you're doing, to the drug strategy of the prison. But more importantly, those guys who have come from treatment, and there's about 40, 45, no more than 50, they've got an opportunity to stay clean, to become involved in activities through the working day. So one example of that is, and I didn't think it would work, but that custodial manager that we're talking about, she's been trained in yoga. So she's gone off to Lilleshall, been trained, she's come back, she's delivering yoga, and it's going down really, really well. And it's just, if we properly fund and invest, we'll get results. And then the other side of that pathway is, once they come through that, they can either go off back into the community, or if they're still in the prison, they can go off to G-Wing, which is where Trevorr used to be, enhanced unit, and generally Voc staying away from substances. So you've got that, or to another recovery unit in another prison. But generally, it is just a really good example that if we're serious about our prisons and rehabilitation, there's a cost to it. And I will say, I have criticised them, government put the money where the mouth is, and they put a huge amount of money into these areas. My point with all of that is that what we need to be able to do is evaluate, so the report that you did, what difference has it made, and then think about how we properly commission, and pay for these services, avoiding duplication.
I think furthermore to that, I think just to kind of give a positive, as well as what you've said, I'm saying yours was negative, what you've said. Not being serious, but it's like, I had a guy in the end of the week, and he started to cry in the session on the tech enablement. So when you start accessing that there's this open university, there's all of these different modules, there's all of these different resources, and he's been in the system from young offenders to adult prisons, and he started crying. He goes, I don't know that I got access to all of this. I could have access to this for free.
Yeah.
To go down again, and I think these are the moments, and I think as well from the sessions, I think from a prison perspective again, with like kind of, you're talking about Sam Weston, like you got Mr. Canadine, you got Paula, you got Mr. Shane. These guys are dedicated on the wing that make sure that the regime is unlocked and for them to deliver the work. But if it wasn't for Paul Newton, Paul Brindley, Sam Weston, to have that tech enablement, because originally we were supposed to do it down the employment hub. So when Claud and Laura set it up, we were supposed to be in employment because of the logistics of getting so many people into the room to do that. And the tech enablement was an issue because you have to bring dongles in and all of that stuff. Yeah. And so we decided, spoke to Drug Strat at the time, it was Lee Bywater that was running it. He goes, look, there was nobody on there when we first started on there. There was people on there, but we was the first organisation to run the programme on there. And I think what came out of it is like the tech enablement, and because they're open to it. So now an individual can come to Sam and says, you know what, I want to do a couple of modules.
Okay.
They'll put him onto the system.
I was literally just going to ask, how do individuals get onto this?
But they have to be accompanied, so because of security reasons, a staff member as there, so what they do is they log them onto Thrive.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is this a case of where a member of staff would go, I think you should be involved in this Thrive programme, or is it them coming forward to say?
Previously what was happening, previously because it was open to allowing people to come in, do you know what I mean, to say, look, voluntaries, these are the people, the list of names and stuff. But what Sam Weston has done now is say, listen, I really believe in this project. It's having great outcomes. We've had people released since that have been on the programme as well, that have doing some pieces of stuff with us as well. And that's separate to Trevorr and all of the other lads. And she's seen the benefits. So what she's saying now, because of the way there's a service, substance misuse service, and there's that clinical model, that's mandatory. They have to attend them mandatory sessions. But they've put our program into that as well now to say this is mandatory as well, because this is the outcomes that's coming out of it, even though we're not clinical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Because that's the benefits of it. So going forward, obviously we're going to continue running the program in there for the foreseeable future anyway. kind of thing. And going back to Paul's point about the evaluation, we're going to bring in another evaluator that's going to evaluate the whole
process, the pathway.
Not just that, the stuff was on, and then combine that together and stuff.
So, I mean, what are your hopes, Trevor, from Career Matters, Thrive? What are your hopes for positive change within the criminal justice system? What are you hoping to see within the next 5
If I was
to
to
10
say
years?
one of my hopes is that we have more governors like Paul. Because without governors of this stature, still always going to, the challenge is always going to be great. So that is an important hope from inside. From outside, we need more career matters, we need more lived experience charters, where we can now see society on the outside saying, we understand that these people have made a mistake, but it doesn't restrict them from achieving greatly if they have that ability. Those are my hopes.
How about you, Paul?
Just to say another note, Paul just received an OBE as well. Do you know what I mean? And it's for all of the great work and that, so I just thought I'd put that out there. Do you know what I mean?
Is that one of your hopes, Paul?
Well, I think one of my, I've got a year to go before I retire. You know, I've spent a lot of years in the service. I think one of my hopes is that what we do is that we should more regularly take the opportunity to be able to say, and why is it that this year after year after year after year doesn't work? And what does work? But moreover, what is it that we could do differently, that we should do differently? So this is Paul Newton talking, it's not HMPPS, it's not government talking. I've long held the belief that prisons should be run locally. And
So can we, when we say prison should be run locally, can we expand on that?
Yeah,
What do we mean by that?
what I mean by that is that is it right that nationally that we have a prison service that drives generally the direction of travel? Should it that what we have, so whether it was a mayor, whether it was a police and crime commissioner, and again, I'm not talking to the prison service, I'm talking for me, and then we have community boards that are absolutely engaged in the journey of those people that we incarcerate. By definition, you know, most people that go into Birmingham prison are released into the Birmingham area, most people. So that resettlement aspect, I think that it should be absolutely linked. This is my hope, is that we learn the lessons of years and years and years of things that don't work. But how do we engage, you know, local government, local authority, police, all the employers, educationalists, local, how do we employ all of those people or engage them to own, and including, you know, the community, into that resettlement of that man or that woman or that child back in to our local community. And until we do that, I think that whilst there's been some brilliant work as a collective, and there's some real evidence of that, if some people went into Birmingham prison, well, they do it actually, they go in there and think, oh my life, I didn't realise that this was happening, you know, and so we try to be everything to everybody, but that is difficult sometimes. But I think my strong plea would be to government, and we've got an opportunity with the new government, and there's a lot of sound bites that are coming up from different folk around, actually we might need to do something a bit different. My strong plea is actually get hold of the community, irrespective of whether it's a vote winner or not, have that debate with society around what we want from that population. But what you would need to do is to really not force feed, but lead some of that conversation, because we all want people, you know, to be those taxpayers. We all want those people, you know, that come into our system, you know, to contribute back into their families and the society and that stuff, and minimise that prison population. Where we are at the moment, the projection of the prison population is over 100,000. It's not sustainable with the level of investment that we've got at the moment. Something's got to change, and I'll get off my soapbox now. But that's my hope.
Can I come in on the community part? And probably, I'm sure some of you'll probably have the similar experiences. That I'm currently working with a charity organisation, and as much as what Paul has said around getting more community organisations who, you know, these men are going to come back, men or women are going to come back into that community. So the community's best positioned to support and serve those men. The issue has always been funding and how that funding is distributed within that community. And a lot of charity organisations now, especially with the cost of living, you know, the money isn't there, and the money isn't there from government either. So it is very challenging for organisation that relies on donations to grow to meet the capacity, because so my charity provides services for ex-offenders, but the need and what we're able to provide is just not compatible, because we would like to grow, but we can't grow because we're very reliant on funding that are very piecemeal and year to year, so it doesn't give us long-term planning to grow to meet the particular needs. So I think there does need to be some restructure and reform around who's best placed to provide those support. Is it within the community where the men are going to go back to, and actually in the community where the community know the men, and how that money is distributed.
It's like when we use the term hidden disability, that's exactly what it is. It's a hidden benefit, because you're supporting these individuals coming out of prison and they do well, but it's hidden but what you've done is put them back in society where they can contribute, but you can't see that.
I think there's another way of looking at it as well, from a cost-benefit analysis perspective. So if you're looking at individuals that are kind of incarcerated, cost the system thousands and thousands of pounds each time they come into the system, and these small organisations are doing some quality work helping support with that, so they help saving the system finances as well because of the support that's offered. But I think there's a thing there around quantity and quality. So because a lot of it's focused on quantity, so it's all about numbers, and the person gets forgotten within that process, and the quality is forgotten. So when you're looking at these big organisations, for an example, probation, just a part of HMPBS, let's put it out there, their caseloads have got 100 plus people in the caseloads. How are you supposed to be doing rehabilitation with 100 plus people, one person? It's not, and no wonder you're seeing 120 recalls come in one day. Do you know what I mean? So it's about that community of practice, not looking at the quantity, looking at the quality of the work, and bringing the numbers down. If that makes, I remember just by experience.
Yeah,
I remember
agree, 100%.
when we first originally set up a pathway in HMP Birmingham. This was in 2017-18, and it was called the Prison Liaison Service. Now it's called a Reconnect Service, and the way we done the kind of the analysis around it at that time with the commissioners, that there's this many people going in custody that have seen the liaison and diversion services going, so we brought the numbers down to 11 a month that we could work with, high intensity needs, complexities, 72 hours upon release, intense support and stuff. And then you had backlashes from other that's too many, less numbers and stuff.
Yes.
But what that was able to prove, if you give a quality of work, you're going to get better outcomes, and we got better outcomes. And now that service so I've left obviously a few years ago. Before I left, it became the Reconnect Service. I'm trying to get that to. So that's down to the people that were delivering the job, because it does come down to that management, good leaders, and you're able to get better outcomes. And I think again, there's so many different factors that we have to take into consideration.
And how can people get involved with Career Matters, and that's partners of organisations who want to get on board?
So I think from our perspective, again, people can get in touch with us to our Career Matters website, get in contact with us directly, I can give my email and stuff. But But I think as for us is obviously we're doing some great work at the moment. I mean, HMP Birmingham, the whole purpose of today was to kind of like celebrate that piece of work that we've done with HMP Birmingham, to get the message out there that if you're forward thinking, innovative, these are the things that you can achieve. And that I think from a career matters perspective, we're heading in the direction of some positive practices and a lot of interest in the work that we're doing, because it's forward thinking, it's different, it's a bit unique. Not a bit unique, it is quite unique and stuff. So kind of like people out there that get in touch with us, and like there's people around this table that I work collaboratively, because we've collaboration, we've done this today, turning up and doing this. Paul Newton coming out of the prison to come and do this, that's respect, that's the relationships that we build. Trevorr come from all the way from Manchester, Claud come from, even though he's Westminster, the people have turned up because of that relationship and to do this message. And I think to work in collaboration to the partners and come and approach us, and we'll tell you further more about what we're doing.
Okay, guys, it's been a pleasure having you all. Samir, always a pleasure. We're going to sign off from Making Change Studios. I just want to thank everyone for coming on board and sharing their experiences. And I'm, excited to see what the next 5 years holds for all of you guys. So I can imagine the sky's the limit. Thank you. You're welcome, guys. That's all right.